Thank you, Deepthi. Okay. Uh, Hello all and very warm welcome to our Visuallect series. And this is about visual thinking. So this is our monthly series that we will be having. And I am so excited to see all of you. And I hope that all of us will enjoy with Brandy for next 1 hour. And yeah, that's all. I hope you enjoy the session and you certainly will have takeaways that I'm sure about. So over to you, Deepthi.
Thank you. Hey guys, this is Deepthi, and I have with me amazing Charu and everyone. Um, we are super thrilled to have Brandy with us, and um, uh, this series, Visuallect, is basically a dream project that Charu proposed. And of course, I'm super thrilled, but I must say she's center of, creating the whole thing. With Charu, we have Purva, who also wants to massively contribute to this series and helping completely. Together, three of us from Women in Agile and Tech, want to present this series to you. What is Women in Agile and Tech? So let me quickly show Women in Agile and Tech to you. Also, we have this beautiful community which is called Agile Virgin, and Agile Virgin had been there for since 2013, very active since 2015, because 13 was a period where we was just learning. So it started when I wanted to learn more and I was looking at various resources. I was going to different meetups, conferences, and that's when there were certain gaps. Like I won't see a lot of gamification, I won't see a lot of visualization, I will not see a lot of deep diving. Um, so I thought, why not to create a platform, of course, which must be very similar to meetups, like webinars and all of that. But why don't we bring in more fresh perspective, a diverse and cultural exchange. And with that intention, I created Agile Virgin. In that journey, we did a lot of gamification event and a lot of unconferences, open space events. So as there is more stage for everyone to come forward, gain that confidence, exchange that learning with the wider community. And of course, we brought in a lot of cultural exchange, which means a lot of thought leaders, knowledge experts from outside India. Because yes, we have a lot of perspective from each one of us who are here. So that's about Agile Virgin. In 2018, I met Agile Alliance, and I met Phil Broke, Managing Director of Agile Alliance, and I proposed, whatever I was doing here. I shared how different programs have different intentions, different takeaways, and he said, "Fine, let's understand what you are doing, and probably let's, start the pilot." So the first thing that I did with Agile Alliance was in 2018, or somewhere around in 19, I guess, which was Agility Today. That is our biggest unconference, which kind of is a fest for 6 months, and we have tiny eruptions, tiny events, and tiny programs happening throughout. Counseling boot camps, job fairs, marathon contest, pre-post trainings, and then the center is a 2 days unconference. And while doing all of this, I connected with a lot of women. And as soon as meetups used to get over, they'll walk up to me and they will ask about how do you manage time? How do you do all of this? For me, it never looked like a challenge. I won't say I didn't have challenge. I had, but taking out time and doing all of this never looked like a challenge. And that's where we thought, why not to form a forum by women, and a lot of it should be for women, but not everything. For like Visuallect, it's open. So when we formed this forum, of course, there was a very strong emotional reason to connect, to share, to gain support, and an ecosystem wherein we all can pull each other. Women can do that. So that's what Women in Agile and Tech. I'll just quickly do one slider show where I kind of want to show you our officers. Right now, we are a group of these amazing women. Let me just quickly show it to you. These. And these women collectively are working on various programs. Um, so some of them are working on agile focused learning program, which is called Agility A to Z. Some of them are focusing on gamification with Gamify It, Visuallect, which is what is today on visual thinking, and then Unleash Yourself, which is more on personal growth and development. And none of these programs are only for women, but yes, they are run by women. There is a mentorship program which is specifically for women, which focuses on the 360 degree development. And then there are other tons of things. And all these women are from different cities of India, also focusing on the local development. So that was about women in Agile and Tech. And of course, our enablers are Agile Virgin and Agile Alliance. And so, yes, this year, their major focus is on India community development. And I feel extremely fortunate to leading that. So that was all, from my side, Charu. Over to you. And
Yeah, thank you so much, Deepthi, and I feel really, great being part of this community and working with you. So before we start with Brandy, so we'll be having session for 40 to 45 minutes, and afterwards we'll have a Q&A session for 15 minutes, and we'll be using different platform for that, basically different tool for that, that is menti.com. But I would request that let's get engaged completely in next 40-45 minutes with Brandy, and afterwards we may ask questions to her. So over to Brandy, and thanks a lot everyone once again for joining us.
Good evening. I am so darn happy to be here with you. I am in Chicago, in the middle of the US, and thank you so much for this opportunity, and it's wonderful to see how robust your events are and what you're doing. So very, very, very happy to help kick off this visual thinking series. And let's see, I'm pretty comfortable with presenting and also kind of keeping an eye on the chat. So I would say keep the bigger questions for later. But if you have like a quick clarifying question, if something you don't quite get it, I can keep an eye on the chat just to let you know that I can be tuned into that at the same time. So I'm gonna hop on over to my slides. And I've got two monitors here, and sometimes it's a little confusing. So Charu, if you could help me with one second here, make sure you're seeing the full slide and not my presentation view. So one moment. All right, are you currently seeing a black screen with presentation view or a full slide?
Yeah, I can see the full slide. And,
full slide?
Yeah, I can see that.
Okay, so you're not seeing two slides side by side?
Just a minute. Yeah, so yeah, it's sorry, it's two slides side by side, not one slide in a full.
Great. I will flip that then.
It is still showing two slides.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
And
now it is correct.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Perfect. And I'm just going to get my chat open, like I said. There we go. Awesome. All right. So again, so happy to be here. And I just wanted to give a super quick introduction because I know the whole world doesn't know who I am and what I do. Here you can see three general types of roles I hold in the world. And if folks know me, a lot of people know me from my graphic facilitation work. So since 1996, I have had the specific role of going into an event and being the one person who draws for the group of people. And that has been an absolute pleasure. I've been able to serve so many different organizations on so many different topics. And for me personally, I've been so excited over about the past 10 years to be transitioning, that's a better word, from being the one person in the room drawing for the group to teaching everybody these skills. So in the center column there, you see my role as author and teacher. And the first book, which was written about being the one person in the room drawing for the group, is the Graphic Facilitator's Guide. And then 4 years later, I created the book, The Idea Shapers, which is about visual thinking for everybody. And today I will be using examples from the live work as a graphic facilitator, but do know that the same kind of principles in this visual organization scale are going to apply to different types of roles. It's just meant to be a context setter. sort of a structure to think about your visual thinking in versus this only works if I'm working as a graphic facilitator. Definitely more broad than that. And then on the right, like I said, doing more and more work teaching everyone these beautiful skills of being able to think visually. And that may be in person, that may be online. I'm very proud that the Agerbeck method, my core online course, which is the companion to the Idea Shapers, has learners from 43 countries. So that is a huge point of personal pride for me from my little home office here in Chicago. And just to give you an example here, this is a, here in America, The Wizard of Oz is a very common movie. Everybody knows it. And when I was first trying to describe what the heck visual thinking or graphic facilitation was, I wanted to use content that folks knew so they could understand what on earth it was I did when I came into the room with a giant roll of paper and put a big piece of paper up on the wall. But this kind of gives you a sense of my visual style. I tend to like to really integrate images, the words and the images into a whole composition. Personally, that comes from, I do come from a fine arts background. Not everyone does. A lot of people in graphic facilitation don't, but just to know that that sense of composition definitely comes from my lifelong drawing and having come from that fine arts background. But you absolutely, if anyone's already intimidated, this is 40 years of experience. This is, you know, tons and tons, you know, the thousands of hours of practice. And you absolutely do not need to be able to draw like this to be able to think visually. So big, big caveat there. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is a model that I created for an anthology called The World of Visual Facilitation. And it is this thick. So this huge, giant book. My favorite was a woman in the Netherlands who actually split the book into the 5 sections and got them rebound. So it wasn't, you know, quite the brick. But the invitation to contribute to this anthology, I thought about how, you know, how could I share, again, sort of that bigger picture or that context setting around visual thinking. In this case, the book is designed for the live work, but it certainly applies to work that you're doing for yourself, work that you're not necessarily doing live in the room, all this beautiful visual thinking that we can do. So across the top, you're going to see a model, a scale. From on the left, you have got good old text, which most of us are very, very comfortable with. And going from 1 through to 7, on the right side, you have something that's a very, very synthesized visual. And I'm going to show you the steps along the way that go from good old text, familiar text, to visual synthesis, which may feel less familiar. And I'll certainly talk about the steps in between. So here on the left side, and again, this was to give people, I'm going to back up 1 second. This was to give people a context of what are different levels of visual organization, because what was happening as I went out in the world and taught and talked about my work, or if people saw my work, they would think that being on the right side, being towards number 7 was the goal, was the only place to be. And that's certainly not the case. I'll talk about the fact that there's different reasons to use these different kinds of shapes. And hopefully as you're hearing the steps, you'll recognize, oh, I'm really comfortable with that particular step. Or I totally know exactly the type of project I might be on, or event or meeting I might be in, where I might want to use that particular step. So it's not that it's all about going towards the right side of the scale. It's about understanding the different steps in the scale and when each one is appropriate. So again, to know what use case makes sense for what general type of level of organization, and also to recognize that you might be comfortable with 1 or 2 steps, and how could you maybe grow into being more flexible across that scale so you can serve your clients if you are working in that client serving context. So here on the left, like I said, you're starting out with very, very basic text. I'm going to use examples from the live events because that's what I'm most familiar with, but hopefully you can definitely hear those and extend them to the work you do. Certainly, number 1, we're starting from good old linear text. This is where you take that flip chart in a meeting room and you write text. And certainly, because flip charts are oriented, for the most part, are oriented as portrait mode, so vertical, we tend to think about it as a tool for text, versus we'll talk about turning that 90 degrees, and when you have a landscape mode, it's far easier to think visually. So first you got good old text. Next, I have an example of what I call embellished text. For folks who know Mike Rohde's books, the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook, this is, I'm hearing some audio, is that a question? Good. The embellished text is basically, it's still text, but you're adding some more composition, some more scale. A main idea might be bigger. A very common thing with Mike Rohde's style of sketch notes is to have a little sketch or caricature of the speaker. But it's getting a little bit more visual. It's still quite text heavy. And in the way that Mike Rohde works, it does tend to be in portrait mode in a sketchbook. Strangely, I don't have a little sketchbook around here that's portrait mode, but it'll tend to be you open up the pages and you have a column of sketch notes and a column of sketch notes next to it. Now next, we're starting to break that left to, you're reading from left to right and top to bottom. You're in very much in text mode. We're going to break up that linear format and create something that's like the next step. It's a little bit more spatial, and this is what I call popcorn. And this is, you're getting all those different pieces of text down on a piece of paper or on a flip chart or on a whiteboard or whatever surface you're getting those ideas out on, and you're breaking them up and placing them all over the page. Now, this is great because you can fit similar ideas next to each other. So they can, you can go anywhere on the page. And I'm realizing I didn't start my timer. Now I have some sense of time. I always joke when I'm in events, you do not want me as a timekeeper. I have a very good relationship to space, spatial relations, and zero relationship to time. So now I'm good to go. So popcorn, again, is that spatial sense of things, and you do have the opportunity to put similar ideas together. And next to level 2 is 2B, which is basically taking that popcorn, that scattering of information, and adding icons. Now, often what happens is we generally work in cultures where the education system and our workplaces are very, very text-based. And when you discover visual thinking, a lot of folks tend to get into a very binary way of thinking. Like, I used text before, and now I have to take that piece of text and translate it into an icon. So we get into what I call picto popcorn. Each one of those little pieces of text has an icon next to it. Now, it is making what you're doing more visual, and I believe that it also ties up too much of your thinking, too much of your mental focus on translating from text to icon. And in this particular example, there's this kind of blob towards the bottom. Like I was using this kind of dummy example with just lines as sample text and these icons as talk about, if you imagine you were talking about the topic of food, and there's sort of a food theme throughout this model. You can see there's an ice cream cone, a popsicle, there's a little glass of something with a straw, there's a hot cup of something. You can also see a cooking method with a stovetop or a microwave. But down there at the bottom is this weird little blobby shape that is, it's sort of, imagine you're talking about something like a microwave. You're like, okay, I can make a rectangle, I can put some buttons on it, it looks like a microwave. Somebody says beef and there's a cow, or broccoli and there's this little like tree looking thing. And then somebody says the word nutrition. And you're like, how on earth am I going to draw nutrition? Because it's a more abstract concept. So that's the issue with picto popcorn, or what I also call iconitis. It's a little cheeky, a little silly, but I say it's when your icons are inflamed. But it's that idea, excuse me, it's that idea that you're getting too stuck in translating from word to image. And unfortunately, when people discover visual thinking, often they tend to think, well, words are bad and images are good. But all throughout what I teach and what you'll see in this model is the two work together. And personally, I tend to really, really, really de-emphasize iconography. I think there's a massive amount of visual thinking you can do with scale, like big ideas are big, smaller ideas are small, like you saw in that sketch note example. Certainly with using a very specific color palette to make meaning, to use very simple lines to connect ideas or contain ideas. So there's a whole lot I love to teach that's not about drawing icons. because I think that's only a small portion of visual thinking. And as you'll probably see through this, and for those who have looked at other sources and learned from different people, I personally love, when I teach visual thinking, my emphasis is on the thinking. A whole lot of people teach the visual part, which tends to be iconography, but certainly I love to teach and talk about and nerd out on the thinking part, which tends to be more abstract, tends to be more stylized, tends to be more spatial, and less about something like that picto popcorn. Now, here's an example of, this is an example of in an event needing to use popcorn, because it might be something like initial icebreaker at the beginning of the day, or it might be something like a brainstorming session. In these cases, you do want each item captured, each thought captured, and you do want them to be separate from each other, and you do want them to be all on the same level. So here, we're not using any particular hierarchy. In this specific case, we've got two clusters of popcorn, the one at the top, and it's got a label, so there's probably two levels there, right? And below it is another cluster of popcorn that's all the same idea with sort of this closing thoughts as the title. But we're not deciding that this thing is a big idea or this thing is a small idea. Especially in something like a brainstorming session, you want to make sure everything is sort of captured and on the same level. Because I'm a big fan of the creative problem solving method, where when you're brainstorming, you distinctly separate your divergent mode, where you're just coming up with lots and lots and lots of ideas, from the converging mode, where you're deciding, okay, here's what we're going to focus on, here's what we're going to prioritize. So having popcorn where everything's on the same level is perfect for that, just getting the ideas out and they're all at the same level. No judgment, no decisions at that point. And this is, let's see here. I think I might. This is an example of picto popcorn, what I would say. So you saw the Wizard of Oz example, which is very much Brandy style. And I probably drew this around 2000 because at that time, my particular style and way of working, which came from my fine arts background and my love of composition, and looking at a piece of paper as one big composition to create, I was realizing a whole lot of people were used to a style more like this. And you can see there's an idea put down and then a little icon to go with it. So just I needed to create this drawing to help show the distinction of how I was working versus how somebody else may work. So that's a good example of, most of these pieces of content have a little icon next to it in that kind of picto popcorn mode. And again, there's nothing necessarily wrong about that. The biggest danger is when you spend too much of your mental energy making sure each thing you put down has an icon. And often when people are in that mode, they stop listening. They stop thinking about the other things. They're just like going, okay, I got the text down, here's the icon. I got the text down, here's the icon. Now, even if you just shift into, let me get the content down and let me come to the icons later, then you're definitely staying more present and being able to be in that thinking mode instead of getting stuck in the binary thinking of translating from word to image. I hope that makes sense. And the next is this idea. This is actually a term coined by Anthony Weeks. He's a fellow graphic facilitator in California, here in the US. He is well known for his beautiful, beautiful expertise in listening. And he wrote an article for this 2016 anthology I was happy to be an editor on, drawn together through visual practice. And he was talking about different types of listening and how it relates to visuals and storytelling. And he coined this term called scattergram. Now, I think there is actually the term scattergram used in some data analysis contexts. But in this case, it was this idea that it was all these little pieces of information captured with no sense of flow or connection between the pieces. And this is something in my particular field of graphic recording and graphic facilitation, you do see a lot. You've got a whole lot of everything kind of in little bits and pieces, but not any sense of organization. In this particular case, you've got the title is sort of the one big thing on the page and lots of little pieces underneath it. This is what I like to call a poster filled with postage stamps. And again, if this is the shape of that conversation or this is the shape of what you're thinking about, that's perfectly fine. the issue is when every single thing you do looks like this, because you haven't really cultivated the ability to organize your thoughts and use hierarchy, again, to structure a drawing, structure that visual thinking and say, okay, this is a main idea. These are the supporting ideas underneath it. Yeah, and I do hear background noise, so if it's possible to mute, for folks to mute, we're picking up a little bit of, I think, kids in the background on this beautiful Saturday night. Now here is an example where this was the right shape for what was happening. Now this happened to be a 3-day conference where each morning they had about 7 people speaking, and they each had 2 minutes to talk about their sort of voice within this larger healthcare organization. And so here I sort of knitted together those 3 sets of very, very, very short talks into one graphic with that title in the top, and then each of those 21 speakers-ish all on the same chart. But here it was important that it was sort of like those postage stamps within this larger poster. Now next, as we move farther to the right, we're adding more hierarchy. And I have these little arrows, hopefully you can read them on the slide, that go between the steps so you can see what's being added. In this case, we're going from that scattergram, that poster full of postage stamps, and we are adding more groupings and more hierarchy. So here we are using proximity to show that here you can distinctly see there's 5 groupings of information. And out of those 5 groupings of information, you can see that there's the main idea is in that yellow container and all sort of drawn the same way. And then from each of those main ideas, you have the next layer down of detail, and then one more layer of detail underneath that. So even though there's absolutely no icons here, even though it's, there's no imagery at all, there's a whole lot of structure and organization. And this, in my context of doing live events, this is a great way to treat something like when breakout groups are coming back to the main room and sharing what their particular group talked about. So in this case, this could be 5 teams or 5 breakout groups coming back and sharing. You can very, very clearly see what ideas were associated with each group or each breakout group, each team or breakout group, because of those labels that would be inside the container. And I have had, there's plenty of times getting hired and paid the big bucks where this has been exactly the right kind of format to use, because that's what the shape of that conversation was. One of my biggest examples is working with a giant food company, and they had all these chefs. They invited these chefs to come up with new ideas, and it was a very, very challenging project, because we were having these meetings in commercial kitchens where I was surrounded by stainless steel and all sorts of vents and all sorts of noise, because when you're working live as a graphic facilitator, your listening skills are #1. And what they were doing was the chefs had made these sample foods, the ideas they brainstormed on. They had actually made the foods, and they had taste testers testing them. And in this case, it was so rapid fire. A team might be sharing 6 different ideas. So I had the idea in the center, and then all the reactions around it. The next idea in the center, all the reactions around it. And that project, which was several meetings, big, huge international company, it looked like this. And I did use color in this case as part of the visual organization. This team was green, this team was blue, this team was orange. So again, it's not about, in this particular case, it wasn't about iconography, but there was still tons of visual thinking and organization, so that those folks could see, oh yeah, that was the green team, and here was that specific idea, and how we felt about, how that particular idea tasted. And this is an example that very much in that kind of shape of, this was a 1-day workshop that I gave at the International Association of Facilitators North American Conference. My very good friend John Ward and I did the session, and you can see here that yes, there's a banner shape in the center, and yes, I used some stars for the numbers of these 6 criteria. But much like you saw in that in the previous slide, it's very much about clustering similar ideas together and showing that sense of scale and hierarchy. You can very clearly see exactly what those 6 criteria are at a glance, and then you can dive deeper and see what are some of the details underneath each of those particular points. Next, again, as we move more towards the right, we are taking those groupings and hierarchy, and now we are continuing to play with scale and add more structure. Now, in this particular dummy example, again, if we're using this very broad topic of food or eating, we've got a very big main idea in the center. We know that it's the main idea because it's big. We know it's the main idea because it's in the middle. And then around that, you've got different clusters and different diagrams and different details all around that. But you're getting a sense of this is definitely going beyond the postage stamps on the poster. You can see that there's things of different scale. I want you to notice that the 5B step, I like to think of the step 5 in that yellow-green color as being more of what you captured in the moment from the group, like what was sort of understood in the room as a group. And the blue parts of this are if this is your role, if these are the expectations you set with your client, is those moments of more synthesis. Like I'm hearing them say this, and I'm noticing some patterns, and I'm making some connections. For instance, that blue banner on the top right of that diagram could be, here's a main theme I'm pulling out from what I'm hearing. So the bulk of this particular level is here's the shared experience in the room, and here's some of the ways I'm adding meaning to that particular drawing. And this is an example of a past graphic facilitation. This looks like it was a keynote because I've got this specific speaker here, but you can see that sense of scale. We've got the main title in the center. We've got this sense of it being global and universal. But you can see on this chart, there isn't the same kind of structure as the clusters, the yellow clusters, because some things are going to be real big, some things are going to be real small, but there isn't that sort of sense of parallel team, parallel team, parallel team. This is one speaker, but he's talking about some really big ideas, and he's talking about more depth behind each of those ideas. But here you can see there is more imagery here. That doesn't have to be the case, but even if you look at the imagery, you can see it's not that picto popcorn. It isn't that every piece of text needs a corresponding icon. And something like on the right side there where it says integration, that's just a bunch of circles. That's just a bunch of circles within a larger circle. And then those little dotted lines coming off of it could be differentiation, where this circle is a different color from this circle. And again, very abstract, but I'm using the types of lines, the colors of the lines, the fact that we've got nice thick lines for the placeholders for the pieces that are being integrated, and we've got the dotted lines to kind of pull out what the differentiations are. But that's not a pictorial image. Very much like where I show necessary tensions on the right. The word tensions itself is kind of drawn in a more tense, angular way. I've got those nice zigzaggy lines to show tension, and then I've got that beautiful yellow scribble as another support of that. But in this image, the only actual pictorial imagery would be this very broad sort of globe shape. Just below the speaker's name, I've got the idea of give a man a fish versus teaching a man to fish, with the fishing basket next to the fishing rod. I've got my everyman figure there towards the bottom, and a tree. But again, you can see I'm not using, it's not getting stuck in that translation issue we talked about earlier. And so here we've got more structure, more scale. And now we're going to go into that same kind of idea, but the only thing we're adding on level 6 is a sense of the drawing as a whole composition. And this, especially when I'm talking and teaching folks who work live, a lot of people are like, well, how the heck do you know that? And part of that's experience, like what is the shape going to be? What should the structure be for this particular piece of content or the next 2 hours of this meeting? A huge part of this is experience, and a huge part of this is giving myself such a large sort of structure or scaffolding that it's not constrictive. It's sort of a general shape, and I can fit a lot of different things within it. So in this example, this green example, again with that very general sort of theme of food, if I put my everyman figure on the chart, and I have this line which sort of very broadly is sort of the edge of a table, and then I've got the plate below that line, now I've got big, broad spaces in my drawing to put ideas that go around the person eating or that person's health. And I've got a space to attach ideas around the food itself. So sort of eater on the top half of the drawing and what they're eating on the bottom half of the drawing. Again, this is something I'm very, very much, I was wired for synthesis. I was wired for, how did the pieces fit together? And some of you who are watching and listening may be thinking, where on earth is she coming up with this? I do think some of this is very teachable. And I think there's some folks, you might have looked at the first few steps and you're like, ugh, it's uncomfortable. It's not your favorite thing. And then as we work to the right, you're thinking, oh yeah, here we go. This is the way I like to think. This is how my brain puts the pieces together. And like I said, conversely, you might have been super comfortable with the left side, and now you're getting more and more uncomfortable going, that's magic. How did that happen? Where did this come from? So just to recognize that we definitely have ways that we come into visual thinking. Some folks are extremely good at the detail, and they may be really, really good at scattergrams or that popcorn where they're getting every single detail, but they may not have much strength in how do all those details fit together. So again, what I'm trying to do with the integrated whole when I'm working is what is a very broad shape I can use to create a composition. And this is not something that's, if you're working live, is easy to it's very difficult to start with no structure and then try to add a structure later, because you're probably going to start with lots of things on the detail level, and they're going to be drawn and on that whiteboard or that piece of paper or whatever in your sketchbook, and the shape and the structure is going to reveal itself later. And you know what? Especially if you're not working live, there's absolutely no problem with redrawing that content, that information into a structure later. It just happens, again, this is one of my particular strengths. And also when I talk to my clients, as we talk through the agenda, I'm asking questions about what are your objectives? Where are you leading folks? What are you trying to do in this event? That's going to help inform what that structure may be. Now here we've got, this was an event where it was a university who was doing a year-long program about this idea of scholars and practitioners. And this is one specific event where I go into it knowing that this is sort of the exchange or the what's shared between scholars and practitioners. So instantly I'm thinking, I'm going to start this chart with two large figures facing each other. And one is going to represent the scholar, one is going to represent the practitioner. And I know that that's going to be just enough scaffolding or just enough shape that I can fit a whole lot of different things within it. Now, I ended up adding that black line, which is one of my kind of placeholders for a space. So you've got kind of people entering a space, and these two people are in this space. Think very much like very abstract, like a blueprint. Think about like an architectural diagram. But in this case, I'm pretty darn sure I did start with the heads, and I did start with the heads facing each other. But as the conversations went on, I decided, okay, what are their arms doing? What is the space in between these two? What ideas need to be attached specifically to the scholar? What ideas need to attach specifically to the practitioner? But again, I think a lot of people are like, how did you know to do that? And it's, well, again, experience, but again, it's that idea of I'm just getting something down that's so open-ended that it's not sort of boxing me or putting me in a corner. And here you can see I used a limited color palette. In this particular case, both of the figures were the same color. Sometimes I might use, for instance, I might use the figure on the left maybe yellow, the figure on the right maybe blue, and then I might choose to mark things that are about the yellow person in yellow, or type of person. Usually it is an individual, it's usually a team or organization. The things attached to the blue figure in blue, and then using green, the blending of those two colors in the middle for the things that they share. So that's another way that I'm creating a lot of meaning with the color choice. And here again, when you think of specific pictorial imagery, I've got an atom next to chemistry. I don't know if the atoms are right, usually chemistry ends up being a test tube or something. But I've got a very basic rectangle up there that's contracting. Again, I've got that super basic, very abstract sense of a blueprint or a space that they're in, and the figures, the brain, the hearts, and a chain, the connection between the two. That's it. You can see most of the visual thinking is color, very big shapes, proximity, scale. You'll understand the ideas that are connected to each figure because they're close to those figures. And another very similar example, here we've got a central head. This happens to be a very short TED Talk by Julian Treasure called 5 Ways to Listen Better. And this is one of those things, if you if you were to listen to this piece and see this drawing, and this was all drawn live, and I think the talk's like 5 minutes or 7 minutes, this shows you my level of experience with listening and drawing and writing really, really fast. And again, being able to think that quickly and think about structure all at the same time. This is one of those things that took me a really long time to personally recognize that my speed of my processing is a huge gift in what I do. And there are plenty of people who simply need more time to process information. I'm married to a person like that. Like there's something where I'm like 3 steps ahead and I have to go, oh, wait a second. He's still listening, he's still processing. Great. So in our particular relationship, I have to be careful I don't steamroll right over him and go, okay, no, like give him time to process what's going on, and have, just give him that time and space. And yeah, so here you can see kind of a similar structure, very little imagery. You can see some of the same imagery from the previous slide. And that's because as I work and as I gain more experience and as I notice patterns from one event to another event, one topic to another topic, one organization to another organization, I'm building up my own visual vocabulary. I've got my everyman figure. I've got that kind of blueprint dotted line or solid line connoting a general kind of space. But I'm building that as I go, as I get experience. And as you build both that general kind of visual vocabulary, and also as you get very specific, concrete kind of practice drills, something like the way I make connectors or the way I make those numbers, the more experience you get, the less you have to think about it in the moment. So that's my ability to be able to draw this in 5 minutes or 7 minutes is because of all that muscle memory, all those previous experiences working for me as I'm at that giant sheet of paper. And lastly, here we've got what I consider something that is fully synthesized. And this is not capturing all the detail. This is creating something that's more diagrammatic and higher level. Now, specific to graphic facilitation, if you were doing this level of synthesis in front of the group, it's very likely that those individual participants wouldn't feel that this particular kind of drawing captured their experience, because you lost so much of the detail of what they were saying in that moment. So personally, I'm not going to make this kind of higher level diagram live in a room, but this kind of higher level diagram would be perfect if I was taking the work in a live event and helping to create a communication piece to share with the wider organization. Now, the people in the room aren't going to feel listened to if they just saw this, but the people outside of that room would look at what I would do live in one of those couple of those earlier steps on the scale, and they wouldn't understand where it was coming from because they didn't experience that. They weren't there live. So, I think what happens a lot when I'm working live is a client will get really excited because they felt the power of being listened to. They felt the power of seeing their conversation take shape as they were working. And there's so much experience embedded in that drawing that that makes perfect sense to them. And they'll get excited and they'll say, well, we're going to frame this and put it in the workroom, lunchroom, or, we're going to share this with everybody. And I always have to say, whoa, what just happened in that room makes perfect sense to you because you experienced it. That's not going to have the same meaning to people outside the room. So I'm always thinking about who is the audience, and I have a different audience in a live event when I am there to serve that group versus when I'm creating something that is taking those live drawings and turning it into something that makes more sense to more people. Not sure if you, I had some sirens in the back if you could catch that, but Chicago. So this is sort of this very, very high level of synthesis. And like I said, this is the kind of thing that some folks, plenty of folks, most folks, honestly, can't do live. They need to step back. They need to take time. And that's perfectly fine. That's totally fine. And you may have one project where somebody hires you to do this, and it may be a studio project. Again, very much leaning heavily on my examples as a graphic facilitator. But here it's highly, highly synthesized. It's not a whole lot of detail here. You know, you have a clear sense of here is the topic, and then here's the individual eater, in this case, if we're talking about food, and then some of the main ideas around that. Now, a couple examples here is this is my previous relationship before finding my husband. I was dating a philosophy professor, and this was me helping him visualize a poster presentation about this particular philosopher whose name I'm completely, he's the guy with the beard that looks very vaguely like the philosopher, completely forgetting who it is. But this, that we were trying to represent this idea of higher level thinking in decision making. Yeah, that's about as much as I can remember at this point. But it's highly, highly synthesized. It's much more of a diagram or illustration than going into lots and lots of levels of detail. Here we've got Sam Brad, who is a wonderful friend and beloved colleague. He's in British Columbia in Canada, and when he was doing his first newsletter of the year, he asked folks to reflect on what they kind of felt what their kind of picture of the upcoming year would be from what they had experienced in the previous year. Very, very much highly synthesized image. This was my answer, which he shared with his audience. And it's, you know, very highly synthesized, works as a communication piece. And certainly I had lots of messy sketches that looked much more like the things earlier on the scale, more to the left of the scale, until I came up with this more synthesized, highly composed, high-level diagram to share with his audience. And I am happy to share these slides. I do ask you, if you're ever sharing them, to make sure that my name is on it and loosetooth.com is on it, so folks know where the heck these images came from. And I'm also very happy to send you the article from the anthology. So that is the visual organization scale. And I'll very quickly just tee up this before we go into questions. Generally speaking, every other week, especially because I'm here in Chicago all the time, I lead a online Q&A session called Drawing as a Verb. There I share two different models, not the model you saw today. So if you're curious and you want to learn more, in that 90-minute session, very heavily interactive with Q&A, you can join me for Drawing as a Verb. And the next one is on July 28th. And I don't even know if we said this, my website, if you're trying to find more about me and what I do, is loosetooth.com. It does not describe what I do, but happily people remember it. So that's why it works. And there is a video on my YouTube channel that explains much more detail about where that name came from. It's not a terribly exciting story, so I won't share it with you today. All right, let me stop share once I'm in the right place. You can see I took a screenshot as we started. And there we go. Was that useful? I would love to see some comments in the chat if that was useful to you or helped you think about your work.
Yeah, Brandy, I must say it was very insightful session, very useful tips that I'm sure we all will be using. And yeah, it was awesome. And yeah, so, you know, before we go ahead with our question answers, I would request all of you to give us a quick feedback. So I'm sharing my screen, and I would like you to give us this feedback on menti.com. I'm just typing that on the chat box with the code so that we can have quick feedback and also questions that we would like to ask Brandy.
Great.
And
if you're shy about asking questions, please don't be. I love questions. I love conversation. So we're hopping over to Menti.
I'm sharing my screen so that we can see it live.
And certainly if you felt like it was not so good or so-so, I welcome feedback. And certainly if there's questions you felt, if I wasn't clear, or questions you want to ask, which would help you get more value from this time together, I welcome your questions.
So guys, you can also put in your questions here, and Brandy will be answering here. So that would be the third question or third slide that you would see in Menti.com, where you can put in your questions.
Yes, so one of the questions in the chat was, can I share the name of the book from the author who coined the term scattergram? Yeah, so that is one of the articles in this anthology called Drawn Together Through Visual Practice. This is offered through Amazon. And the name of the gentleman who created that term, his name is Anthony Weeks. And he is brilliant and wonderful. He's a wonderful human, and I don't even think he has a website up. His entire career has been word of mouth. So that's part of the reason we invited him to contribute to this anthology, was because we knew that he had wonderful experiences to share, but we just needed to package it in a way that people could learn from him. So that is Anthony Weeks. I'll type it in the chat.
I cannot see any questions on Menti.com. So guys, if you are more comfortable while putting your questions in chat, even that will work.
And excuse me, if it helps get the conversation started, does anyone have any, just to kind of get a read, if you wanted to comment in the chat, sort of what levels of that scale do you feel most comfortable in? Do you have any questions about any particular part of it? What are parts of the scale where you thought, man, I'd really like to grow into being better at that type of visual thinking? Also, I wouldn't mind, we didn't do this at the beginning of my presentation, which I often do. If folks would like to, just a couple words in the chat about is visual thinking something completely new to you? Is it something that is a way that you naturally work, but you didn't necessarily have a name for it? Is it something you feel like you're beginning to explore and learn? Or is it something where you're like, I do this all the time, I've got this down? So I welcome just a couple chats or a couple of comments in the chat about that. So how would you pardon me, how would you suggest that we develop our visual thinking? What practices or steps would you suggest? Oh, one of the biggest things, and I teed this up at the beginning and then didn't bring it up when this kind of shifted in the diagram. But one of the biggest things you can do is, we're so accustomed to processing the world on a piece of paper like this. And one of the first things is just turn your piece of paper because now you're automatically going to be thinking more spatially, and it helps break those habits of, much more linear thinking and word-based learning or word-based thinking. By all means, I would say the Idea Shapers, it's a very dense book, but it's got lots and lots of good very specific concepts to learn and practice around visual thinking. That's my second book, The Idea Shapers. The biggest thing is practicing. And the one piece of hopefully you picked up on this as I presented, the one thing I would suggest is completely put imagery off to the side and just think about how can I get my ideas out of my head and onto a piece of paper with those lines, with that text, with color choice, with proximity, putting similar ideas near each other, dissimilar ideas apart. Because again, I think so many people, when they think visual thinking, they immediately go to icons, they immediately go to pictures. And I highly recommend to actually put that aside and just see what happens when you don't even worry about how do I draw this particular thing. How do I draw this piece of broccoli, or how do I draw the concept of nutrition? And so another comment is, I'm a good drawer, but I feel it's hard to synthesize on the spot live. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing we talk about in the live Q&A session, not so much today, is this idea of product focused drawing versus process focused drawing. And often when you're a good drawer, you're usually very good at what you do, and you are working in a more product focused way, that you're representing something and somebody can recognize that thing you're drawing. And in product focused drawing, and it's a great, that kind of drawing are great skills to have. I'm very thankful I have those skills myself. And for the people who are intimidated by representational drawing, their inner critic is thinking, is this drawing good or is this drawing bad? Is it pretty or is it ugly? And when you're focusing on process focused drawing, that kind of drawing is actually better when it's fast and messy. And certainly to your point, part of the reason it's messy is because it has to keep up with your own thoughts if you're doing this work personally, or with the group's conversation, or with the presenter. All those reasons, the process focused drawing is actually better to be fast and messy because you're keeping up with some kind of live experience. So they're really different modes, and that's why I like to talk about what is a product focused drawing versus a process focused drawing. Everything I build, I teach is much more focused on process focused drawing because it's very, very powerful, and it's not usually the kind of drawing people are taught about. And it's the beautiful thing about a process focused drawing is the only test of how good that drawing is does it get you a step farther in what you're trying to do? So when you're focused on process focused drawing and you're not making it a masterpiece and you're not worried because you drew that part of the face a little weird, then you're able to really quiet that inner critic and make progress. So there are different modes for each type, but I am here to definitely sound the bells for process focused drawing. And so the question is how to develop it step by step. That's a very good question. I am not a very good step-by-step learner. And when I wrote The Idea Shapers and it was out in the world, folks would say, like, okay, this book is great, but what do I do? And that's because they were more step-by-step learners. That is the structure of the Agerbeck Method online course. This is not meant to be a strong sales pitch, but I had to stop and think about what would somebody learn first? What would somebody learn next? And how could you keep on building step by step in your practice? In that course, I start out with that very simple thing. The first module is about canvas, and it's about turning the page 90 degrees. And it's about doing things more like popcorn, where all you're really thinking about is distilling thoughts and getting them on the piece of paper and relating them spatially on that piece of paper. And then it's so funny, I'm completely blanking on the second. I know the third module is text. Oh, the second module is proximity. Very simply, are you clustering similar ideas together? Are you getting those ideas down and you understand this is one group of thoughts separate from this other group of thoughts? Those are some of the first steps. And like I said, it's much more thinking about getting the ideas down, figuring out, where they should sit on the page, and not going anywhere near things like iconography or imagery. In the Agerbeck Method process, which is 9 modules, The eighth module is image, and mostly it's about drawing like very simple people and very simple faces. Again, because those are very expressive, they do a lot for you, and it doesn't kind of put you down that rabbit hole of I can't draw, and how do I make this icon for this idea? So, you know, just starting out with just simply getting stuff out and getting more spatial. That's the biggest thing. Is we are very well trained for many, many years to think very linearly. But like I like to say, when is the last time you solved a problem in a straight line? Usually what we're dealing with, especially for folks working with change management and agile process and all these beautiful, wonderful, complex problems, it doesn't happen in a straight line. So, you know, being able to fit a whole lot of ideas on a piece of paper, because you're breaking that linear shape, because you're using scale, you are using hierarchy, you can make drawings where you can really process far more complex information that you can't do when you're trying to line up words into sentences, into paragraphs. That's why the writing books are so challenging to me, is how do I put this information, this very experiential, hands-on, spatial work. Did I say spatial twice? I might have. That's how excited I am about spatial reasoning. How to take that and actually, you know, get it into paragraphs and get it flat onto pages and put them in order to make a book. Oh, I'm glad to hear that somebody said it's completely new for me, and thank you for the introduction. Absolutely. Yes, different aspects of visual thinking, color proximity. And if a really useful video that's going to be a different way of saying some of the things I said here. If you go to YouTube and you just look up what is visual thinking, I've happily got a video that comes up pretty high on YouTube, but that talks about, I do a very nice job kind of summarizing some of those steps, but I would say that some of those elements of visual thinking, proximity, just what is the placement on the page, using text, but how do you, because text is, again, words and images work together. One of the components is text, and a lot of it's about listening skills. A lot of it is about being able to distill what you hear into fewer words to get the kind of, you know, gem of the idea and not full sentences, which it takes training, takes practice. Certainly there's color. You know, that's a big, beautiful topic I love to teach, because I think for a lot of people, color could feel intimidating. It's I think it's one of those topics where people get really stuck into, like, I'm not a capital A artist. I personally believe using fewer colors makes more meaning. So you know, how to choose color palettes that work for what you're doing. The next component I would say is lines, and for me, it really, and you'll see this in the Idea Shaper book, lines that connect two ideas and lines that contain an idea. And there's massive amounts of visual thinking you can do just with that. The next step, I'm giving you the order in the Agerbeck method just because it's, you know, it is a good sequence. The next element of visual thinking is scale, which you very much saw in the model. Big ideas big, supporting ideas are smaller. Here's, you know, here there might be a visual structure for the whole thing, especially if you're using a specific process. Within your drawing, there might be smaller images, like a little icon or a little diagram within a bigger drawing. Scale is the next one. Next is the shape, and this is where, you know, we're getting into the more sophisticated stuff that again, if you're not really, you're not so much big picture or synthesizer, might feel a little new or weird. Is that idea of shape is how do the pieces fit together? What is the composition of this piece? Which I gave you some kind of examples of in the scale, the visual organization scale. Then there's image. Like I said, in this particular model of how I teach step by step, image is number 8 out of 9, and the 9 is flow. And 9 is and flow is about how are you showing the flow and direction within a drawing. It's also about how do you keep the flow of your own practice and flow of your ideas. So again, those are some big, broad, beautiful aspects. But like I said, my emphasis is on the thinking side of visual thinking. Certainly you can learn from folks who are very, very, very much more image-based. Is there soft? Sorry, please.
Sorry to interrupt, and before you
No.
take next question, so we are just left with 5 minutes. So this session might end abruptly. So I just wanted to remind you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's yeah, like I said, no relationship to time. So thank you. The next question is there software or an app which can be used for this, or always pen and paper? I think I would end up using an eraser more than my pen. Yeah, I personally always like using pen. Again, that's practice. Again, that's just like the way a felt pen hits a piece of paper is, I'm very tactile. So I always will say paper and pen because it's so immediate, and you can always grab something to write on and something to write with. When it comes to working digitally, I'd say the best way to give yourself the most options is to use a drawing app versus like with a tablet versus something that has more structure in it, like a mind mapping software. And mind mapping, if folks have heard of it, is it's a type of visual thinking where you put the main idea in the center, like a hub, and then you have spokes of detail coming off of it. And I personally don't have any problems with mind mapping other than it's one specific shape. So often with that kind of technology, you're forcing all your ideas into that shape versus kind of having a big empty canvas to work with. But I am not the best person for digital examples because I still absolutely love pen and paper. And I do think that an aspect of this is, most of us are living with a lot of screens all the time. We're carrying around a screen in our pocket, and it's actually easy to tune out screens, whereas you can't tune out, the physical stuff in your hands. And also, the more digital you go, the kind of more distance you have from your ideas. You're trying to get into those different menus in whatever program you use versus just being able to grab another pen, a thicker pen because you want a thicker line, a different color because you want a different color. So I'm always personally going to choose I'm always going to choose the paper and pen over anything. And the question, how do you judge spacing while scribing? That really is practice. That's a thinking, for a lot of people it's challenging because they're thinking in the opposite. Usually you're thinking about the marks you're putting on the paper instead of the space you're leaving between them. But to really kind of tune into that negative space is what's going to help you there. And Churu, I think I'm getting really close to 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think we are almost there. And thank you once again, Brandy, for the wonderful session. And I hope people had their takeaways. And yeah, I hope to see you guys once again on our next session. That will be on third Saturday of next month. That is August. So yeah, hope to see you all there. And thanks a lot, Brandy. Thanks once
You're
again.
very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Randy.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy. It's a